Hello, and welcome to part 3 of 3 on unlocking the circular value within the commercial equipment industries. We'll be exploring the commercial equipment industry's key opportunities and challenges for moving to the circular economy from the perspectives of those groups within the industry who are really seeking to drive this change. Welcome back to those of you who tuned into part 2 yesterday, and for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, welcome and thank you for getting involved in Circular Economy Week London. Feel free to tweet about this session and everything that you hear and learn over the course of this week. Find us at Loopcycle on LinkedIn or Loopcycle_ on Twitter. My name is Lugano. I am the co-founder and CEO of Loopcycle. We are a product traceability platform that drives integrity within the reuse marketplace and redefines the management, recovery, and resale of valuable secondary products. In this series, we've looked at how industry thinking on the circular economy and the whole net zero carbon agenda is changing. We've looked at how manufacturers are responding to the circular economy through the design, construction, and recycling of their products at end of life. Now we're focusing on the challenges facing the operators of commercial equipment in the sustainable management and maintenance of these products, and the opportunities for these operators to drive the circular agenda back up the value chain. I'm delighted to be joined by Richard Hales, Energy and Sustainability Manager for Cambridge University Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust. Richard, welcome.
Thanks, Lou.
Can you start by giving me an overview of your organisation?
Well, absolutely. Essentially, we're an NHS trust based in Cambridge. As Cambridge University Hospitals, that basically means we comprise 2 hospitals, one being Adam Brooks, which is essentially provides emergency surgical and other sort of general medical care. We also have the Rosie Hospital, which is a maternity care hospital on campus here. We are the sort of teaching hospital for Cambridge University, which makes us a teaching hospital in that sense. We're fairly big, based on a single campus. We're about 11,000 staff. So if you just imagine a very large hospital in Cambridge, you're pretty close to understanding what we are.
Excellent, thank you. And with regards to the growing circular economy agenda and resource efficiency in general, can you describe some of the initiatives that you're already working on at the moment?
Right, I mean, the NHS has been keen on sustainability for many, many years, and quite rightly so. And all hospitals and trusts are encouraged to work on that and have been for some time. So we have, up till I suppose 2 or 3 years ago, worked on a fairly conventional environmental sustainability agenda. We looked at energy efficiency, renewables in our building services, looked at active travel, looked at waste and recycling in those sort of conventional type ways, and we look at those across the kind of physical infrastructure of this place, which is substantial. All the organisational policies and procedures that run here, and again there are many of those, and the behavioural side for our staff. So it's been a constant push, and it's been sort of carbon focused. I think what's happened and what we've worked towards, I think, in the past 3 or 4 years is a recognition that actually an organisation that wants to be environmentally sustainable has to really adapt the circular economy approach. And what I like about the circular economy approach is it actually gives us a vision of where we need to be and how to do it as well. It's all very well knowing sort of roughly a few things to do and have a few initiatives, but you need to get deep into the how of that. And the circular economy just gives you that framework for doing it. In terms of initiatives, particularly relating to the circular economy, we are trying to link, I suppose, what we buy with what we throw away. And being a large hospital, we are essentially a very big consumer. So we want to be as responsible a consumer as possible. And that means looking at what we throw away and trying to reuse and recycle that as much as possible as we can. But I would say that in a conventional sense and using the standard routes, a lot of that in terms of recycling is fairly low value recycling. So we're currently looking to see if we can basically kind of sidestep those routes and see if we can bring the materials that we buy and then use, and see if we can recycle those back more directly into the supply chain in a much more circular sense. We've been working regionally on a process, an analysis process, looking at our sort of top 200 clinical plastic consumables, which I think will generate some really interesting results. And we're also looking at ways that we can get better value out of larger bits of equipment. Being a hospital, we do get through quite a lot of large equipment, fridges, freezers, large bits of analytical equipment. So trying to work out how we can get those back into the system, because basically they are assets of ours, and we need to try to get value back from them. We buy a lot and then we tend to pay a lot and have it disposed of. Circular economy suggests that there are better ways of doing that.
Mm-hmm. It's such a broad remit, and in that answer you've mentioned procurement, but buying versus what goes out. You've mentioned engagement. So the question is, internally, where does the agenda for circular economy sit? Does it sit with a particular department, or is it kind of owned across the whole organization?
Kind of the sustainability function here sits within the estates department. That's not unusual, because a lot of the work conventionally around sustainability is around building services and improving energy efficiency. But the role pushes outward, and I mean, our board are very, very supportive of the environmental sustainability work that we do. And I think with the work that Central NHS has brought on with the Greener NHS programme that they launched sort of at the beginning of 2020, things have started to change more quickly. And so it is definitely a board level agenda to move towards net zero and pick up on those initiatives within the Greener NHS programme. So it sits across the whole place, and being a hospital full of lots and lots of caring staff, there is an awful lot of people out there that want us to do more, constantly do more, and the circular economy gives you a way of providing a picture for doing that. I think of it as net zero and zero waste as our two sort of objectives. Zero waste meaning that we stop thinking of waste as waste, and think about what we consume, and while we're consuming it, we think of what's going to happen downstream. A lot of traditional sustainability and carbon reduction tends to try to push upstream to receive goods with less embedded carbon. I think what's really important is that once you have it, is to try to make sure that carbon that's been embedded isn't wasted. If it's a total loss at the end of it through disposal, then if you want it again, all that carbon has got to be re-embedded all over again in a brand new product from scratch. And there's been an awful lot of studies out there that I think indicate that trying to look after the carbon in your hands and trying to make sure it isn't totally lost goes a long way towards contributing to the net zero agenda.
Yeah. With regards to where the organisation sits with the wider NHS, how coordinated is the circular agenda across all of the other trusts in terms of sharing knowledge, understanding policy? Can you describe that for me, please?
I think at the moment, I don't think the circular economy agenda is spoken about that much. I mean, we now have a very strong net zero agenda. I think here, we've been talking at the trust for 2 or 3, 4 years about the importance of the circular economy in reducing carbon emissions. But it's not the net zero agenda and all the objectives and kind of guidance and the targets that we set clearly fit in with the circular economy agenda as well. We're keen on it here in Cambridge. We're part of the East of England Regional NHS Sustainability Network, and we talk about it across the whole network. And I think it has traction as a way of thinking about how to achieve net zero. And I think as soon as you appreciate how much carbon there is in waste, and the fact that you can reduce that carbon by looking after that waste better and trying to get it back into the supply chain, not as waste but as a resource, then you're doing something really quite substantial with the scope 3 emissions. You've got scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, and the scope 3 emissions are all those embedded in all the goods and materials and equipment that we purchase. and that is very high in the NHS. It's typically 60 to 70% of a typical trust's emissions will be tied into scope 3, and trying to do something about that by simply shouting upwards at suppliers is not going to achieve a huge amount. It will achieve something, but actually looking after and trying to get what you've finished with back into the supply chain without it being subject to landfill or incineration or very low value recycling it seems a very important objective because of the amount of scope 3 emissions that we have running through our organisations.
So how do you communicate the circular economy to your own stakeholders and to your wider stakeholders, who I assume will be people who come into the hospital as well as those people who work there?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose on a day-to-day basis, you don't need to communicate it as long as the infrastructure that makes it happen is there. And that's, we work very hard on our waste infrastructure in a conventional waste segregation sense. And, we've got 24 odd reuse and recycling streams to pick up waste, if you like, and try to ensure that as little of it as possible is wasted and we get as much value and reduce the cost and the carbon and the losses in that. I find the easiest way to demonstrate the circular economy is simply to draw a circle and draw a line and show that the linear economy, which is pretty much where we are at the moment, there's a little recycling, but it's fairly weak. And then you just draw a circle, and it just makes sense. I mean, the circle is a natural system, and I've given a whiteboard or a pen and a paper, it doesn't take more than 5 seconds, and you can even describe it fairly readily. So you don't have to get into talking about scope 1 and scope 2 emissions and all the more technical terms that tend to come with the circular economy at all. It's just, in so many ways, it's just simple common sense. I mean, you see it out there in the natural world all the time if you just stop and look at it. The fact is we're not really doing it, and we haven't done it that way for a good 50 years very well.
Where do you see yourself or your organization on this journey that you started to embrace a circular economy and net zero carbon?
I think we see ourselves as trying to be as responsible as consumer as possible in the circular economy. If you sit in the circle, we kind of sit at kind of 6:30, right down the bottom there at the point of consumption, and it's easy to see us there. We do, as I say, we do a lot of reuse and recycling. Our waste management is something we take very seriously. Where it struggles is the infrastructure around it. We need the supply chain to give us more products that are designed for reuse, repair, and recycling. An awful lot of products we get, it is incredibly difficult to do that with. When you've got 11,000 staff and over 16,000 bins out there, all of which to receive waste at different types. If the waste doesn't readily lend itself to recycling, it becomes a very difficult process for us. And then we need the infrastructure out the other end there to collect it. We will bend over backwards to try to stream waste as cleanly and basically to retain as much value in it as possible. But then we need systems in place and the regulations in place that allow that to be taken away and given high value recycling, or ideally repaired and refurbished and sent around again. But that infrastructure is really not what it ought to be. When you want to be a responsible consumer, it is not that easy to be. I think you can get fobbed off into thinking you are by using the recycling word, but if you don't really know and you really haven't increased the value, held on to the value, it's a struggle.
Yeah, and what you've said actually is going to lead me into the next question about barriers. Would you say infrastructure is the biggest barrier, or are there other barriers that you believe are affecting the move towards the drive towards a circular economy?
I think having suppliers that want the leftovers of their goods back again, because they have the facilities, hopefully as local as possible, to do something with them. Because as the manufacturer and in the supply chain, they should be able to affect a much higher recycling, reuse, repair, refurbishment approach to those things. Having disposal contracts that are not as awkward as they are at the moment, and are much more flexible in terms of an organisation as ours being able to get waste away from site in relatively small batches, but they're clean, tidy small batches. So we're not left having to store stuff for a long time. If you could do that at a regional level, you know, there are lots of many hospitals in the region. If you could link those together, and you can have small organisations basically collecting from several sites on a regular and flexible basis, then you do start to join the supply and disposal up, and we're much more able to be a responsible consumer in that process. I think you also need the regulations to recognise the importance of that, to facilitate that happening as well. So it's just when you see you see the value of equipment and goods coming into goods in here, and then you see it coming out as waste post consumption. Okay, in a hospital, a large proportion of that has to go down an incineration route because of the nature of that waste, but there's also a large proportion that doesn't, and we could do with as much help as possible in understanding the value and finding routes through, which is why the work on clinical plastics is so important, and anything we can do around large bits of equipment is so important too.
And in your opinion, based on the work that you've done so far and the barriers that you've encountered, what do you feel would deliver the biggest step change in performance out of all the things that you've looked at so far?
I kind of feel it's having a supply chain that really wants to have back post-consumption goods, materials, and what's left, and one where everything can go back and be used again. So you're short-circuiting a lengthy supply chain that has embedded an awful lot of carbon pollution and other goods and labour into it, and you're able to, as I say, short-circuit that, so it doesn't all have to happen again. The resources last longer, the carbon is reduced, the pollution is reduced. It just seems the way to go. If the supply chain is in that condition, then we can work better with it, and disposal stops being waste disposal. It becomes something very different.
Yeah, absolutely, and I totally agree with what you're saying there about the supply chain. One thing that we haven't touched on yet is technology, and particularly things like digitization, which I have a small interest in. And what's the appetite of your organization to embrace innovations, particularly digital innovations? Is it something that's being looked at organizational level at this point?
It is. I mean, the NHS has a keen interest in it, and this hospital does too. Medicine is a high-tech, highly digitized activity these days, and so I don't think there is any fear or any reluctance to go down that route. I think the important thing is being able to prove these things genuinely work and genuinely deliver, and it's not tech for the sake of tech. It's actually working for the circular economy, and is genuine in what it wants to do and how it wants to do it.
Do you feel that the business case for your kind of circular economy initiatives and sustainability initiatives in general, do you feel that that's changing in how you present those business cases to your board, or is it still kind of focused on traditional metrics?
I think it is starting to change. I think people are increasingly understanding, with the climate emergency and the nature of the environmental crisis all around us, that actually the opportunity cost of not doing this is unbelievably huge. You know, if we don't take these steps to approach net zero and look after our assets and look after our goods and look after, you know, those resources really, really well, within 10 to 15 years, it may not be possible to do that. And that's an opportunity cost that is of unimaginable size. And so business as usual, which has got us to where we are, I guess, is just not going to work. And it requires some pretty brave, radical shifts, and it's one that has to be done by everyone. And as I say, sustainability is for everyone, and everyone has to do their bit in that process. And explaining what that bit is and making the right decisions to make it happen is pretty fundamental.
Richard, one of the things that we can't escape right now is COVID, and the impact that has had on hospital functions and hospital staff. We've also seen, in light of health and safety, environmental as picky resource efficiency measures have taken a little bit of a backseat. For example, use of disposable masks, disposable coffee cups. How do you see this going forward if we're now in a world where COVID is going to be an uncertainty for a while, but we need to get back onto that circular economy agenda and progress it at pace? Do you have any thoughts about that, particularly with regards to your organization and how you can keep that on the agenda going forward?
Yeah, obviously, COVID's had a huge impact here. And one of the biggest impacts, you know, we felt, especially through the estates function, is in the supply chains, which have clearly been really stretched, and in the waste that's been produced. And I think it's really drawn people's attention to that relationship between supply and waste. And actually, in lots of ways, you know, when you see the sheer volume of PPE that we get through, and you see the impact of that, it really does bring to the surface the need to find alternative ways, even in a sort of health crisis, to have thought ahead and to think, yeah, actually, this could happen again. Therefore, if it does happen again, what does that mean for supply chains, and what does it mean for all the products we buy? Do we have to have the same levels of waste as we've been through? And the answer is probably no, if you can get things better organized in terms of the products and what needs to happen to them afterwards. Again, obviously, you know, being a hospital, you know, when you've got infectious waste, it has a different agenda and has to go down a different route in terms of incineration. But there's an awful lot in terms of packaging and reusability that is already being explored, and so I suppose in some ways it's given a bit of an extra boost to that by just seeing the levels and the stresses that COVID has put on the hospital in terms of sort of supply and waste, and the need to get hold of these things very quickly.
So on the subject of equipment and disposable use of equipment, as the recipient and the operator of a large amount of commercial equipment of varying types and sizes, do you have any thoughts around how the manufacturers of this equipment can support you as an operator in more efficient use and recovery?
Yeah, I think we already have, you know, some of our equipment streams are already sort of provided to us as a service, which is great because that kind of takes the ownership aspect away. I think it's important that those services also incorporate any consumable waste as a consequence of that process, and again try to minimise that with, you know, cartridges that can be refilled, and means of getting reagents back to manufacturers, so that, you know, the waste burden isn't a waste burden because it's not with us as waste, and actually it's returning back to the manufacturer as a resource that they can, again, as we said before, go on to reuse and repurpose themselves. So to me, it's where the huge opportunity lies. You know, we don't want the waste. We don't want to have the waste. and if we can just find a way around that by constantly thinking circularity, then the future looks much more positive. And I think the work that's out there, the work that you're doing, is all pushing it in the right direction.
That's brilliant, and a really great note to end the episode and the whole series. And so thank you, Richard, for joining us today, and the way in which you described the challenges and the opportunities that you face within your organization. We're going to reflect on everything that we've heard and everything that we've learned over these last 3 episodes. In the meantime, connect with us on our social media, subscribe for news and updates on our website. And if you want to reach out directly, then you can contact us at hello@loopcycle.io or visit our website, loopcycle.io. A huge thank you again to you, Richard, for your time today. A huge thank you to all of our speakers and to you for tuning in over the last 3 days. I really hope you've enjoyed the content and found it informative. So I'll say goodbye for now and enjoy the last of Circular Economy Week.